Huzzah!
So, what a turnout. Thank you all for your patience. So sorry for the delay. I think that we are streaming, but at this point in time, who the hell knows? Welcome to Astrology Night at SoulFood here in Redmond, Washington. Welcome to those of you who are online. And I'm going to see if there is anyone online. Oh, there's a couple people, and I'm hoping that in fact, yep. So if you're online, introduce yourself and say where you're, where you are at geographically. The rest of us, there must be 75 people here or so, and it's exciting to see so many faces and so many familiar faces, and welcome. Oh my God! All right, so. As many of you know, when planets don't ever move backwards, okay? But the word retrograde means that they look like they move backwards. It's an optical illusion, and you can kind of see what this optical illusion is like if you put a finger out in front of you and look at something distant and then look at it from close one eye and then the other, and your finger is in front of a different thing. Well, that's what happens when the Earth is going around the sun and the planets are much more distant from the Earth, and it looks like planets go backwards. And as many of you know, Mercury retrograde is the most common retrograde, or at least it's the planet that goes retrograde the most often. And because Mercury moves quickly compared to the other planets.
You're on your title card still.
I'm on the title card. Oh, sorry all. And let's see if we can get that. Gail, can you fix that, or do I need to fix that? Let's see. Here we go. Oh, did we just do that? Did she just do that?
That was you.
That was me.
Click that one.
No.
No, never mind.
There
Perfect.
And is that the camera can aim more at me? That's good. That's good. And actually, Craig, if you unzoom and you can show my shirt for a minute, we're going to come back to this. But this shirt is in honor of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we will be talking about in a few moments, as soon as I get beyond the opening moment, which I wasn't planning on. But that's what retrograde planets do. When a planet turns retrograde from Earth's point of view, it's because the planet is closer to Earth than it is at other times in the cycle. Now, we're getting ready to have a Mercury retrograde toward the end of the month. And Mercury turns retrograde 3 times a year for about 3 weeks at a time. However, that's not the retrograde we're talking about now. The outer planets go retrograde once a year for about 5 months at a time, but because they move so much more slowly, they move a lot slower than Mercury, and so it's like the planet is moving, and then when it looks like it's stopping, like a pendulum changing directions, and then begins the retrograde, it's very gradual. So if you were in a little MG and you were going 60 miles an hour and someone slammed on the brakes and threw it into reverse, you'd know it. But if you're in a 18-wheeler going a quarter of a mile an hour, and then the driver stopped the truck and put it in reverse, you might not even know when it went from forward to backward. So the outer planets are like that. Why are we talking about that? Because when a planet is stationary, meaning changing from direct to reverse, and again, if you think of the planets like a pendulum, they go direct and then they slow down and then they stop from Earth's point of view, and then they begin to go backward and they build speed and then they slow down and stop like the pendulum until they reverse speed again. And at the slowing down and stopping and reversing or changing direction, the planet gains a lot more power, because the faster moving planets, and when I use the word planets, I use the ancient Greek word meaning wanderer. So I mean the sun and the moon and Mercury and Venus. And when those planets change direction, we know it. It's like being in that fast little sports car, and we can feel it like screeching to a halt and changing direction. But Uranus just changed direction from retrograde, which it had been going, to direct. And the astrology world, and for those of you who are, online astro addicts and watch more astrology than you probably should, you know that astrologers all around the world have been talking about Uranus turning direct, and Uranus is the planet of shock, of lightning striking, of awareness. When lightning strikes, the lights go on, and so we're buzzed. Where it's Uranus is sometimes called Uranus, the Great Awakener, because it's something like the nervous system just fires. And so astrologers have been talking about Uranus, which has been going retrograde. It had touched into Gemini last year and then retrograded back into Taurus, where it had been for the last 7 years. And just this week, just a couple days ago, it stationed to turn direct. And the astrology world is saying, oh, wow, hold on, this is it, kapow, bam. Except the fact of the matter is that from January 29th to February 9th, from Earth's point of view, Uranus does not move even 1 minute of arc. 1 minute is 1/60th of a degree. In other words, even though technically the planet is direct, it's pretty much stationary, which means that the entire solar system, from its point of view, is moving around it. Uranus, the planet of electrical shock, surprise, awe, unexpected, upside down. Some people call it the quantum planet because it's where fate and free will somehow kind of come together. And Uranus right now is stationary. That would be enough to mess up this evening. Not that I'm looking for anything to blame this little craziness on, but obviously I am. I hate taking personal responsibility.
Anything but me.
But here's the deal. While Mercury is stationary, the planets while Uranus is stationary, the planets Mercury and Venus are both making 90-degree angles with Uranus. And the 90-degree angle in astrology, the square, is the most noticeable aspect. Physicists say that when two phases are when two waves are out of phase by 90 degrees, that's maximum interference. That's the maximum impact that one wave has on the other. And if you think of a 90-degree angle, it's like squaring off. It's like a conflict. It's like direct engagement, and the planets are going in two different directions. So with Mercury, the planet of communication, the planet of interaction, and Uranus, the planet of electrical and sudden change, that's kind of what we ran into tonight, I think, or at least partly. And interestingly enough, on the way over and earlier this evening, it was like, well, for once we have this wired and nothing can go wrong. Mercury isn't retrograde yet. And I think I quipped Uranus is still pretty active, and so we got Uranianized. I don't know what the right word is. So thank you again for your patience, and my apologies for the waiting. However, as significant as Mercury is this week, this month, even this year, It's not the main player right now on the astrological stage. And the main player or players are, Craig, pay attention.
Yeah.
Are
I was looking at
Saturn.
They want to know where you got the shirt.
The shirt came from this wonderful man that we met in India, who I've known for a few years, and he paints these amazing shirts. They're hand painted, and I'm a sucker for bespoke art, and so I got me a couple of new shirts. His name is Raul. Raul. And I don't think he's online, but because he paints pretty much for locals, and but anyhow, that's the story of the Saturn shirt. So thanks for asking. And Craig, if anything comes through on a question or comment that I need to know, feel free to let me know. Or Gail, my assistant, who's also online, you can always turn your microphone on and yell at me.
I'll give you the sign.
Here, so, all right. So Uranus aside, not that Uranus likes it when we set it aside. The real players this month are Saturn and Neptune. And the thing about Saturn and Neptune is that, the thing about Saturn and Neptune is, hold on a second, that's over there. The moon goes around the earth once a month. And once a month, the sun moves along a little bit. So the moon catches up with the sun every time it goes around, and then another day to catch up with the sun. We call that a new moon. And if our calendar was a lunar calendar, each of our months would begin on a new moon, but our calendar is a solar calendar and it's sloppy. And therefore, it's hard to track lunar cycles or menstrual cycles on a male-oriented solar calendar. Why am I talking about this? Well, every planet has that same cycle of the faster planet catching up to the slower planet, like the moon catches up to the sun once a month. Saturn, which takes 29 and a half years to go around the zodiac or around the sun, Saturn catches up to Uranus, which takes 84 years to go around once. Saturn catches up to Neptune. It's been a toughie. Let's do this one again. Saturn takes 29 and a half years to go around the sun. Uranus still has it's bug in my ear. Neptune takes 165 years to go around the sun once, which means that by the time Saturn has gone around once in 29 and a half years, almost 30 years, Neptune has moved along. So Saturn catches up to Neptune once every 36 years, sometimes it's 35 and a half. But let's just say 36 years. It's a regular cycle. In fact, Saturn caught up to Neptune last in 1989. Prior to that, in 1953, 1917, 1882, and 1846, every 36 years. But this one is different. And it's different for two incredibly important reasons, both of which I'll get to in a moment. However, before I get to that, I want to talk about Saturn and Neptune, because when two planets come together, their energy compresses into the same place. Now, this may be too much information, but the Nobel Prize was given to Wolfgang Pauli because he showed that two subatomic particles couldn't occupy the same place at the same time. Sounds normal or lucky, but that was a big deal thing. Two planets cannot occupy the same place at the same time either. But when their cycle, like the moon catching up with the sun, or like Saturn catching up to Neptune, when two planets come to the same place in their circular patterns around the sun, it's like trying to compress that energy into one. So what is the energy that's condensing or compressing or trying to come together? Well, it's the energy of Saturn and Neptune. Saturn is the planet of reality. Now, I have to be careful when I say reality, because what I mean is the reality in which we live, the three-dimensional world of things. Saturn is the world that when Newton wrote about his mathematics of how things behave, it was in the three-dimensional world of things, of the world that we live in, so that we have laws of motion and laws of cause and effect, and to every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. All these mechanical things of science and physics are based upon observation of our senses of reality. So Saturn is that which is real. It's also the status quo, that which is real in our three-dimensional social realm. Saturn also represents the limit of perception. And this is going to be really important in just a moment, because until we developed technologies that allowed us to perceive things outside or infra or ultra, that's outside of or inside of the narrow band of our sense organs. In other words, we can see things, but with technology, we've included things that we couldn't see that are farther away, more distant, or things that are tinier than we could see before. So science has moved us into realms that push or expand our understanding of what reality is. Nevertheless, Saturn represents that which is perceivable and that which is quote unquote real. Until the telescope was developed, for thousands of years, maybe for millennia, when people watched the movement of these wandering things up there, these planeta, the Greek word, the wanderers, Saturn was the slowest moving thing they could see, because nothing moved slower than Saturn until you went out to the fixed stars, which over a lifetime didn't move at all. So Saturn is the limits of our perception, the limits of reality. And then in the 18th century, Uranus discovered, it exploded our understanding and view of the real world, because all of a sudden Saturn was no longer the limit. And then Neptune was discovered in the 19th century, and it even grew further, and then Pluto, and now, of course, as you may know, NASA tracks some 500,000 things going around the sun that most of us don't know about, and we can't see with our senses. So what is reality? Saturn has to do with the authority that describes reality. Saturn has to do with holding on to what you have, or to pull in, and because outside of Saturn, there is nothing. And in fact, in the Christian mythology, Saturn, or Satan, or Satan, was basically the dividing line between that which was not real, meta to physical, and that which was three-dimensional. In fact, Lucifer, a fallen angel, slipped through the gates of Saturn into the three-dimensional world. That's what a fallen angel is. And of course, in that mythology, or in that understanding, humanity has basically fallen from the divine proportion into the Saturnian realm of what appears to be real. Now, you go to the Eastern mythologies or philosophies, and they tell us that what we see and perceive with our senses is actually an illusion. That Maya, in the Sanskrit, is the veil of everything that we can perceive in the three-dimensional world that hides the true reality, which is really just electrons bumping into electrons at trillions of cycles a second. All of this is just interference patterns. It's all just a play of light. It's all illusion. So we have Saturn, the planet of reality, and Neptune is the planet that's associated with illusion. But here we have to be very careful because we like to say, oh, that's just an illusion, as if an illusion was false. But an illusion is actually something that is pre-Saturnian, meaning, I always quote William Blake, who wrote, "What is now proved was once only imagined." Or the idea of Disney, a dream is a wish your heart makes. Dreams do become true. My astrology friend Caroline Casey says that imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. What I say is that Neptune creates the framework and the scaffolding for Saturn to crystallize reality on. Something pre-exists that which occurs in the three-dimensional world. And in fact, it turns out that science kind of has it backwards, because science will teach us that we evolved to such a nervous complexity that consciousness popped out of it, when it may be exactly the opposite. It may be that consciousness pre-exists reality. And of course, many of you know The Secret, or the idea that what you think is what will happen, or this idea that thoughts are architectonic, that the hum of a thought actually is what ultimately creates reality. So this is really interesting, because once every 36 years, the planet of what's real lines up with the planet that's beyond reality. Remember, Saturn was also known as Father Time, and Saturn was also known as the Grim Reaper. You get what you deserve. In the three-dimensional world, it's karma. It's every action has an opposite and equal reaction. This is Newton's third law of motion. And so at death, it was assumed that that was it. And yet, over the past couple hundred years, as our consciousness absorbed these planets out beyond Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, it's become more and more accepted and understood, not based upon religious mythology or religion, but based upon actual experience, that death is not an end. Saturn is not the end of the road. It's just a transition point from physical to metaphysical, from three-dimensional, this reality, to something else. And of course, for those of you who are familiar with the scientific advancements of the 20th century, you know that when our technologies moved us into realms that were so tiny that physicists went crazy, literally crazy, because they couldn't understand how the cosmos, how reality wouldn't follow the laws of cause and effect and Newton's mechanics. And of course, from that was invented or created the idea of quantum physics, that there's an entire universe of things out there, almost like looking at the ocean and seeing the ocean and judging everything in the ocean by what you see on the surface. And quantum physics basically shoved down the throats of these three-dimensional physicists that the surface of the ocean is only what we perceive, but the foaming mass of stuff that's occurring beneath the ocean is really where the real action is. And so all of this has to do with what's going on right now, as the planet of reality meets the planet of illusion. What the fuck is real? That's it, thank you. No kidding. But the thing is that we can track these Saturn-Neptune conjunctions like clockwork, and we can see patterns over the years. I'm going to reference in a few minutes some events talking about a specific aspect of the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions that come from a podcast that just went live, I think late yesterday, by Chris Brennan, who does the astrology podcast. Many of you probably, those of you who are real astrology addicts, know Chris or Chris's work. And I would recommend this podcast if this topic is interesting. It's only a half an hour summary that he did yesterday of a podcast that he did with another astrologer from South Africa, a man named Nick Dagan Best. And that podcast was close to 4 hours long. So that's how deep this is. I'm going to just tiptoe over the top of some of these things. The important thing to understand is that last summer, Saturn and Pluto came so close together, not in physically, but in motion. In other words, the distance between Saturn and Neptune is probably, I don't know, somewhere around 750 million miles, maybe something like that. But from Earth's point of view, when the faster one catches up with the slower one, they look like they're aligned. And these are the moments that we astrologers track. And Saturn came within 1/4 degree last summer. And I'm actually going to put up a slide, or if Gail is here paying attention, we need that first asset. Let's see, are you there, Gail? The Saturn Neptune 1 slide. There it is. Thank you. Yeah, those of you who are here don't have as good a view as those online, but you can, I think I can make this full screen, can I? Hold on a second. That didn't do it.
The little bottom on the right, bottom right of the screen.
No, that
No.
Up,
Just a tiny bit.
bottom right.
It's on the video.
The video.
Go to the video screen.
Right there.
The info, that box.
Yay! I get by with a little help from my friends. All right. So this is an illustration actually that I took from Chris's little talk yesterday. And what it shows, I don't know, I know the people here can see my mouse cursor, but basically what this is showing is that Saturn and Uranus each moved into Aries last summer, and they came within, here it says less than 1 degree. It was actually less than 1/4 degree by July and August. And then because of retrograde motion, they both looked like they were slowing down, and then Saturn didn't quite reach Neptune in the alignment, backing off, and then Neptune backed off from that same position. And they both moved from Aries, where they had moved into. Saturn moves through a sign in about 2.5 years. Neptune takes about 14 years to go through a sign. So Neptune and Saturn both moved out of Pisces into Aries, but they didn't quite come together. But they were close enough that you could taste it. You could see it in the media. You could feel it in the air, and we'll talk about what I mean by all of that. And then each of those planets began retrograding, and the distance between them opened up as they both moved from Aries back into Pisces, where they had been. And then they turned direct. Actually, Saturn turned direct. Neptune turned direct first, then Saturn turned direct. Saturn has already, Neptune has already moved out of Pisces and back into Aries, and Saturn is just about ready to, and Saturn will catch up to Neptune exactly on February 20th of this month. This is the key date of this alignment, but kind of like the lag of seasons, like why the first day of summer isn't the hottest day of the year, or why December 21st isn't the coldest day of the year. Often there's a time after an exact alignment for culture to catch up to it. So we won't have seen the height of all of this on February 20th, but we're in the midst of what's going on right now. That is a very deep meltdown of what is real and what is unreal. What is what is news and what is fake news? What is someone that you see talking online versus an AI construct of what you think you're seeing online? That the fine line between Saturn, which should be the definitive. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember library science. We learned that everything in the library was either fiction or nonfiction. It was an absolute line. And I would venture that most of us, at least half of our reading is, we don't know. It's both. It's one or the other. It's neither fiction nor nonfiction, or both. And so this is the melting of Saturn's role as being the absolute definer of what the end of the road is. Life and death. You know, for anyone who has spent any time listening to the telepathy tapes, and if you haven't, they're very interesting, and there's so many other things online now. It used to be that going back 150 years ago, that someone who talked to people who were dead was considered to be an absolute frightening and anomalous thing. And then beginning in the late 1800s, there was a whole rise of this, especially in Western Europe and in England, with mesmerism and hypnosis and even psychoanalysis of the unconscious, which there was no words for prior to this. And so, and also during that time, we had the rise of theosophy and people like Madame Blavatsky writing, and I mean, it was just a whole wave of the breakdown of what we thought was real. What is real? Rob Hand, and many of you who have heard me teach before know I quote this. Rob Hand, who is one of the great astrologers on the planet these days. Rob wrote, I think about 30, 40 years ago, he said, astrologers used to teach that Saturn was the planet of reality and Neptune is the planet of illusion. And now we're beginning to realize that Neptune is the planet of reality and Saturn is the illusion there was one. That's where we are. So, let me just, I made some notes earlier, and I just want to make sure I cover a couple of things. Saturn-Neptune cycles are not about answers. They're about learning to live without our old answers. This is part of the repeating pattern because this conjunction, this alignment of authority or crystallization of reality, Saturn, and the dissolution of that boundary. When you take a salt crystal or a sugar crystal and melt it in water, what happens to that crystal? It dissolves the reality of that three-dimensional structure. And that's what Neptune does to Saturn. On the other hand, Saturn precipitates the dreams of illusion into the three-dimensional world. And yet, when reality is in front of us, when our dreams become real, the yellows aren't as bright as the yellows were in our dreams. The purples aren't as purple. Often we have and catch this word, a disillusionment process. Because there's nothing wrong with disillusionment, because it's better to be disillusioned and live in the three-dimensional world of Saturn where we do have to function than to think that illusions are real. However, it's holding on to certain illusions and doing the hard Saturnian work. In astrology, Saturn is often referred to as Saturn the taskmaster. And it's the discipline and the work that Saturn requires to make our illusions or our dreams become manifest. So, Saturn is a reality check and Neptune dissolves that reality. And really, when you put the two together, what we're really discussing is the limits of perception. Or maybe it's even more liminality, because it's that place where we don't know what's on the other side or what's beyond it, but something is there. And we spend more time in those trans-Saturnian spaces than we might think when we dream, for example. We are not bound by Saturn. Every thought we have becomes real in that moment. And this is an example of what the Tibetans call the Bardo states, or the states of in-between, when one dies or leaves the body before rebirth in the Tibetan and in other indigenous mythologies where these ideas were not lost, that these in-between states actually are mappable and understandable. And in the dream realm, when you have a dream, whatever you think happens, boom, like that. And so together, Saturn and Neptune kind of represent living on that edge of certainty and uncertainty, or liminality, if you will. And of course, what that means is that we live in a state of confusion. Now, the word confusion is also a great word. Again, some of you who've been around my teachings know that I often talk about how the word fusion means two things melting together. And a Greek origin, means with, coming together. Confusion simply means two things melting together. Ego don't like that shit. Because the ego's job is to maintain separateness. That's why I have my life and my goals, and I do what I need to keep my life together, the life of my family, my loved ones, those around me. That's all having to do with me. And each of you have the same. And where our lives touch, that can become, catch this, confusing. Because in a way, love is a melting of those boundaries, where the ego no longer has that sense of separateness. And I can't help but think of, the Beatles, I am you as you are me as we are all together. Goo 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 But there is that sense of what happens when the ego loses its dominance, or its sense of what's there. And so what happens when Saturn and Neptune come together is old systems and structures. Structure is a good Saturn word. Status quo, the st words etymologically often go back to Saturn words in Latin and in Greek. Stasis and stamina and crystallization and austerity, and the list is crazy. First, last, things that have structure. But what happens is that the old structures lose their legitimacy, and that there's this rise of the dream. The idealism kind of comes out, but then there is that liminality of what in the idealism is going to just fade away as a dream, and what is it that's going to become, another good Saturn word, crystallized. So let me look at a couple of charts here, if I can figure out how to get my screen back in
Bottom right.
Bottom right here. There we go. I want to just set the stage here. We're looking at a chart, and I know that many of you study astrology and many of you don't. What we're looking here at is simply a map beginning with 0 degrees of Aries, which astrologically is the beginning of the cycle. What do I mean by that? The 0 degree Aries point is set every year exactly to match the moment of the vernal equinox in the northern hemisphere. That's the starting point. And Aries is the first sign. It's the sign of creation. And the unfolding of the zodiac goes all the way around through to Pisces, which is the total dissolution. I think of it as the psychic swamp. Don't take it personally, you Pisces out there. Because in the swamp, that's where the magic occurs. That's where whatever it is that's dissolved into this muck and this murk in the sea of consciousness. It's not just, remember, Neptune, which is the modern planet associated with the sign of Pisces, Neptune isn't just the god of the seas, it's also related to the seas of consciousness. And so from this murky, melted of everythingness melted into some universal ocean of awareness, out of that pops ego, spring. The spring occurs, something. And so that point of 0 degrees of Aries, astrologically, is a significant enough point that there are schools of astrology that go back to the early 1900s, what's called the Hamburg School of Astrology, that gave us things like Uranian astrology and cosmobiology and tools that most of you don't know about and don't care about. But they began to teach that when you do a birth chart, that you map 0 degrees of Aries, called the Aries point, as if it was a planet. That's how important it is. Now, here's the first of the 2 reasons why this conjunction of Saturn and Neptune is so different than any that have ever occurred. It's been at least 6,000 years since Saturn and Neptune lined up, as they will on February 20th, at exactly 0 degrees of Aries.
Whoa.
And this in itself, you know, I've said this so many times recently, I get tired of hearing myself saying this, and some of you might be just as tired of hearing me saying it. But astrologers often say, this is the most intense new moon ever. Oh, this is the most amazing Mercury. Oh, this has never happened in so many. And I'm always the astrologer who goes, now, I remember sharing this stage for years with my now deceased, or at least gone to other realms, partner, Jeff Jower, who used to say that the astrologer's full employment act was those planets keep going round. And on one hand, there's a part of me that has always said, no, it's not that big of a deal. No, there'll be something on the other side. No, it's not. It's happened before. It happens regularly. It'll happen again. Well, this one seems to have not happened in 6,000 years, when life was obviously very different here. And there are other things that have changed, but there's a second reason we'll get to as to why this particular Saturn-Neptune conjunction is different than all others that have ever occurred. All right, so I want to come back to this chart for a moment, because what I want to point out here,
Rick, can you make it bigger?
I can't here.
You can,
Oh,
you can
I
make
can.
that little bottom
I
right
can.
Yay! Thank you.
Is there a way to make me go away from behind it? So what we're seeing here is a horoscope wheel. And the word horoscope is like the word telescope or microscope. Scope means, it's Greek for a view of or a perspective of, or what you see. And tele means far away. Telescope, you see far away. Microscope, you see tiny. Horoscope, you see the hour. That's all a horoscope is. And even though I wrote daily horoscopes for almost 20 years, that's not a horoscope. A horoscope means the hour, the view of the hour marker. And what we're seeing here, though, normally a horoscope would have houses and an ascendant. And I don't want to confuse those of you who are not astrologers with terms that we don't need, because you only have an ascendant or houses if you have a horizon. And we're looking at a chart of Earth anywhere on the planet, so there's no horizon. It's just a map. And we're using this 0 degrees Aries point as simply the beginning point on the map. And then each of the planets going around from 0 Aries, where here you can see Saturn and Neptune, both at 0 degrees of Aries, and it's actually 0 3/4 of a degree, or 45 minutes. Saturn and Neptune have come together at that same point, and the moon is also in Aries, and each one of these symbols, the symbol for Uranus, for Jupiter, each of these symbols are different planets. And I don't want to encumber us with this right now. I just want to point out that Saturn and Neptune will be in exactly the same place on February 20th. Now, what I'd like to jump back to is a chart for 59 BC. Now, I have to say that I'm cherry picking some dates here. My list of dates goes on for pages with events. And again, if you're interested in really diving deeply into this, you can watch the 3.5-hour Chris Brennan piece on with Nick Dagan-Best of the history of Saturn-Pluto conjunctions, or the short 30-minute version that went up yesterday on the Astrology Podcast. But often, Neptune, well, there's a good start. I have the arrow aimed at the wrong thing. All right, we're going to skip over this one just because the picture isn't what I wanted to show. But what I wanted to show, it's one of those, is that in 59 BC, that Saturn was moving into a conjunction with Neptune. And Neptune is often known in astrological circuits as that which is hidden. When Neptune was first discovered, astrologers began looking at it in charts and said Neptune is the planet of deception. It's the planet of being crazy. It's the planet of institutions and things that are tucked away and not wanting to be seen in the three-dimensional world. And in 59 BC, Julius Caesar actually put into motion what's called the First Triumvirate, in which he basically stole the republic and became the first dictator, so to speak, that overrode the Senate. And of course, we see some things like that happening right now, not just in the United States, but around the planet in general. But often at the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, we often see secret societies or secret groups or things that are kept out of the open that seem to have more power or are outed or are made illegal. For example, here in 1773, which is right around the coming into the American War for Independence, the Revolutionary War, and then leading to the Declaration of Independence and the establishment of the United States. We can see here, though, that Saturn and Neptune are both at 18 degrees of Pisces. And it was on a December evening that a group of people in Boston that belonged to a secret society called the Sons of Liberty dressed up as Native Americans, it's American Indians, and went out into Boston Harbor and unloaded several hundred crates of British tea as a protest. That in some ways became the fueling point of the idea of no taxation without representation that led into the American Revolution. But the Sons of Liberty was a secret society, and they wore masks. They were hidden. They were dressed up so that they wouldn't be revealed. That was at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 1773. Here's an interesting example, and this is in 1307. The Knights Templar, which was established as a secret order, many of you probably know a lot more about them than I do, but they were established as an order within the within and alongside the Catholic Church. That was an order that was really the first concept of banking, where you could, for people who were going on crusades, for example, you could put money in a bank in France or in England and then journey by foot across towards the Holy Land and get your money out in places that were other than where you were. Now, that wasn't the single purpose of the Knights Templar, but it was a secret initiate order within the church. That was basically disbanded by the Pope in 1307. said the church has nothing to do with this anymore. And of course, you can see here, Saturn is aligned with Neptune, and Uranus at that time was in the same mix, which is an interesting separate, event. But there is certainly a Uranian flavor to what happened at that point in time. Now, here's where things get kind of weird, because somehow history has memory for these events, because that was in 1307. Here in 1738, the Pope made an edict that disbanded or banned, again, Freemasonry. So again, this is another thing that began as an order within the church, and the Pope basically made it a sin for any Catholic to join the Masons. Now, that in itself would be, and again, of course, we see the Saturn-Neptune conjunction again. Now, that in itself would be interesting, but oddly enough, in 1917, the Catholic Church issued a declaration reaffirming the ban on Freemasonry. And there was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, again, arguably, I am cherry-picking some events, but I'm only doing this to give you a flavor of what some of these, historic, pieces are. Changing the tone a little bit. And then, just as a point of interest here, in 2023, when Saturn first moved into Pisces, so Saturn and Neptune were now moving toward their conjunction, which is again happening in a couple of weeks. But when Saturn first moved into Pisces, Pope Francis issued a document confirming that that joining the Masons was excommunicable. I have just two other dates to show you, and then I want to talk about these events from a separate point of view. In 1882, there was a secret alliance called the Triple Alliance that was established between Germany, Austro-Hungary, and Italy. And arguably, this alliance is what set into motion what became the primary alliance of the World War, World War I. But also in that same year, Standard Oil and Trust was founded by the one and only John D. Rockefeller, who has, for those of you who have done deep dives on the real history of things, know that John D. Rockefeller was not necessarily an admirable person. But, I mean, just as an example, many of you may know that John D. Rockefeller is the reason why we have pharmaceutical companies and not natural medicines. And there's a whole, I mean, that's just one of the pieces of. But in order to rip off the American people and to get around the U.S. government, he was able to create Standard Oil and Trust that became a holding company for what ultimately was declared a monopoly and eventually broken up. But this was established in 1882. And again, we often see moves that have to be, that are done with things in secret or things that have important ramifications, but they don't come out until much later times. And I want to jump to the last chart that I have here for today. And that is a chart of 1953, when again, Saturn and Neptune were aligned. And this is the year that the CIA began its MK Ultra program. How many people know about MK Ultra? About half. So all I can say is Google it and be prepared for a rabbit hole that you have no idea how deep it goes. I mean, this was, and I can take this chart off because I just wanted you to see that I'm not making these dates up. These charts are calculated by a computer, and they all show the Saturn alignment with Neptune. MK Ultra was a program that was initiated by the CIA because of their fear, and often at Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, you see reaction to fear of in the Red Scare, the reaction to that same period of time, 1953, in the United States, the rise of the McCarthy And you see this again and again. But the fear here was that the Russians were doing things in war that we were being left behind on. And the CIA began investing a huge amount of money and manpower into using LSD, not necessarily telling the people that were being given LSD that they were being given LSD. And they began to work in this area of mind control and setting up agents who would do things that didn't know anything about what they were doing because they were blacked out. And it's a very long, deep dive of complexity that then goes through huge amounts of money that were spent on remote viewing. Again, the Soviet Union at that time it had invested a lot of resources in all of this stuff. And it was the fear at the CIA that began the whole MK Ultra thing. And that's really all I want to say about it right now, other than, again, it was secret and it was something that had huge ramifications over a long period of time, but people didn't know about it at that time. So here we are now with this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And, you know, I've done so much research over the years and I've done talks on Saturn-Pluto cycles. And I have a YouTube video on that, which is a whole different flavor. That's in every, 33-year cycle roughly. And in my monthly this month, because I've talked about Saturn-Pluto cycles so much, every time I went to say Saturn-Neptune, I said Saturn-Pluto. And I'm only saying that to acknowledge for any of you who did see it. Yeah, I know. And Gail just popped up the YouTube video for those of you who want to see one of the Saturn-Pluto cycle videos. Thank you, Gail. All right, so we have already established that this Saturn-Neptune conjunction occurs at 0 degrees of Aries. I want to go back to the Saturn-Neptune 1. Gail, can you pop that back up, please? The very first one that shows the February 20th. Thank you. Because there's two other things here that I want you to look at. One is that we can see that Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius. Pluto takes it takes 248 years. I was going to say about 250 years to go around once. And Pluto's orbit is very elliptical, so it whizzes through some signs in 12, 13 years, and then it goes maybe 35 years in some other signs. Pluto just finished spending a decade and a half in Capricorn, and just a couple of years ago, it tipped into Aquarius. But because the planet's retrograde and Pluto moves so slowly, it went from Capricorn to Aquarius, back into Capricorn, into Aquarius, back into Capricorn, and now it's in Aquarius for the next 14, 15 years. Pluto in Aquarius is a big deal because Pluto was last entering Aquarius the year that the U.S. court system and the House of Representatives and the Constitutional Congress ratified the U.S. Constitution. Pluto, as you may know, is associated when it was first discovered, when all these new planets were first discovered, they were all thought to be fearful and horrific. Uranus was the planet of deception. Now we know it's the planet of creative imagination and spirituality too. When Pluto was discovered in the early 1930s, it was associated with mass fascism. It was associated with death. Pluto, the lord of the underworld. And remember, Jesus basically removed Pluto from his throne as the lord of the underworld, basically saying you don't have to go into your individual hero's journey into your unconscious, because remember, unconscious and underworld are the same thing metaphorically. And so the whole idea of Jesus dying for your sins basically robbed millennia, well, at least centuries of people from the opportunity to go on their own hero's journey. Didn't have to. Jesus did it for me. And so this is part of the rise of of the psychoanalytic and depth psychology movement through the 20th century, that came off of the once every 500-year cycle of Pluto lining up with Neptune in the 1890s, which was the decade that Freud wrote and published the interpretation of dreams. That's another story. But we have Pluto now having just moved into Aquarius, okay? Meanwhile, we have Uranus, which tipped into Gemini last year, now has retrograded back into Taurus and will be moving back into Gemini over the next couple of months. And when it does, it moves fast enough that it will catch up to that 4-degree point. 4 degrees of Gemini to 4 degrees of Aquarius is 1/3 of a circle. This is what astrologers call a trine, part of a grand trine or grand triangle, equilateral triangle. When 2 planets are 120 degrees apart, there's an unobstructed flow of energy, and it's just the current is wide open. Historically, in traditional astrology, trines are considered good because the energy flows. We moderners know that you can be in a car with your wheels spinning and you're not going anywhere. And so the problem with trines is that just because the energy is flowing doesn't mean you can get any traction. That's another story too. But we are coming into this summer, starting in July, will be the first of 5 exact alignments between Uranus, the great awakener, the planet of shock, surprise, revolution, awe, and Pluto, the planet of death. But you see, it's not death, it's death and rebirth, because we now know that it's the magic of the hidden realms, of the bardo states, of the dream state, of Neptune's imagination that creates the magic of what's reborn. There's no such thing as an ending without a beginning. So we are coming into a period of 3 years, 26, 27, and 28, when Uranus and Pluto will be in and out of exact trines from one to the other. They came close also last summer. And so I think I began saying sometime around last June or July that what's going on now is not what appears to be going on now. Don't be distracted don't ignore it, but don't think that what's going on now is our destiny. It is basically the last holdout of what's a greater transition than humanity has ever seen, perhaps. And again, I'm careful with the hyperboles, but I don't think there's enough hyperbole to describe the potential of what this moment actually is. Now, Pluto, having to do with death and rebirth, having to do with the ending and the beginning, and Uranus, if anyone else's phone rings, I'm going to answer it.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I am.
Pluto has to do with endings and beginnings, and the fact that the United States is at a Pluto return, 250, 248 years since its beginning, it's like it's obvious astrologically that what we're seeing as a meltdown and potential rebirth, granted no one knows what that rebirth will be yet, is right on time, it's right on track, because the United States is in the midst of its first Pluto return. And in astrology, we track returns. In fact, has anyone here ever had a birthday? All that is a solar return. We as a species mark the day that the sun returns to where it was on the day we were born. Everything has planetary returns. The sun is just the most obvious. Now, if we could go back to that, the chart again, Gail, one more time. I appreciate you taking it down, but I need it back up. Thank you. Okay, so we have Uranus moving into a trine with Pluto, and that will happen in July exactly, although it also came within 1/4 of a degree of being exact already last fall. That will be at 4 degrees, and by July, Neptune will be at 4 degrees, meaning that Saturn and Neptune are not only conjoining at 0 degrees of Aries, but they're also conjoining right now at the point that's halfway between the looming trine between Uranus and Pluto, meaning that all 3 of these outermost planets, Neptune, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, are basically each 60 degrees. If you can think of a Star of David, like a Jewish star, or Solomon's seal, that 2 triangles interlaced, we have Pluto, Neptune, and Saturn on 3 adjacent points of that 6-pointed star. And by summer, Jupiter will be at a 4th point. And then by the end of July, the moon will swing past a 5th point. This is the most extraordinary geometry that any practicing astrologer has ever seen. You can go back, well, I've gone back about 7,000 years before that. I don't trust the software, but we've never seen anything like it. So what we're seeing is this planet of revolution, shock, surprise, awe, electrical sudden change, lightning striking Uranus, harmonizing with Pluto, the lord of the depth, the lord of the underworld. I say lord, the ruler, the mythology of basically that which is hidden, that the power comes to the surface. Now we can understand a little bit about Uranus and Pluto just by knowing when they last came together, like Saturn and Neptune are coming together now. Uranus and Pluto lined up, as they do every century or so, in the mid-1960s. And every astrologer on the planet knows that when you refer to the 60s, all of that craziness, whether you're talking about the Maoist revolution in China, the cultural shift there, or the changes in Western Europe or in the United States, the students, the revolution, the consciousness that was coming out during that time, this was all part of the shock, surprise, release, awakening Uranus of Pluto, the Bacchanalian, hidden, suppressed realms. And now these 2 planets are coming into a place where the energy is going to flow, and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is happening right at that middle point, and that's the second of these 2 things. So, recurring themes of Saturn-Neptune conjunctions: dissolution of consensus reality, because that's what Saturn is, consensus reality. Idealism without structure. I mean, and that's uncertain. We don't know. I mean, no one knows what's around this next bend, but we all know it ain't what's here now, because what's here now is unsustainable. And this goes across whatever your belief is in almost any one singular issue. It goes beyond politics, Democrat, Republican, blue, white, right to life, immigration. It doesn't matter what your views are on any one issue. I don't care what your views are. They're wrong. Mine too. And I don't mean they're wrong. What I really mean is that there's a larger perspective that we have to figure out how we're going to integrate and do something from this. And I don't have an answer, and neither does anyone else. But if there's one thing about humanity, is that under pressure, we do crazy shit and we figure it out. I am not an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I like to say I'm a possibilist. And I think that we are at a point that is such a junction point. And although the astrology of the moment is so unique, you can't even find a precedent for it. What makes it even more unique is the social technological structure in which it's unfolding. And for many years, I've been saying that the astrology of the 21st century, late 20th, early 21st century, is different than astrology ever has been, because we have what I like to call global feedback mechanisms. It used to be, go back a few hundred years ago, the only person who would know their chart, who would know where Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were in their birth chart, the only people who would know that were royalty. Because it took someone 3 or 4 days to calculate out all the information. Now, at the press of a button online, anyone can have that information. And in fact, you don't even have to be able to read it or know what it means. You can just ask for a summary, a report. And so people are having this feedback from the cosmic perspective that has changed, that is available to us in ways that it's never been available before. That's number one. Number two, because of the advent of recording technology and social media, every time a planet makes a certain angle, and that angle is repeated a few weeks later or a few years later, what happens is all of the recorded events from 3 weeks ago or 3 years ago associated with that previous transit are back on social media without people realizing that these 4 different things that have occurred over the past 20 years are all under the exact same planetary alignment. And so there's something else occurring that I call cosmic feedback loops, which are kind of like, we know what auditory feedback loops are. Anyone been to a rock concert or heard Led Zeppelin or any someone with a massive Grateful Dead massive wall of sound? When you take sound and you begin feeding it back, you create something new. And we are, with our social media, creating these loops that are different. If you had been alive during, let's say I'm trying to think of a good example, the Saturn-Pluto opposition in 1898, you wouldn't have known about what was going on in England and Germany and China at the same time, that were all in response to those events, whether it was the Boxer Revolution in China or the establishment of the World Zionist Organization, or that same year, all these things that were occurring, or the Spanish-American War. These things all happened at the same time. But if you were alive then, you might not have noticed it, and you might not have known that there was an exact Saturn-Pluto opposition that year. We now have this ability to feed this energy back, which creates an abnormal emphasis on these events that creates the events into something that they weren't prior. And so you add that as a second piece of the loop, into the loop, and then you have the third thing, which of course is not just social media, but is the advent of this crazy thing we're calling artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence or alchemical intelligence. And although we know that the environmental impact is enough to pretty much destroy us all, every time you do a search, with an AI agent, it costs about 3 gallons of water, aside from the electricity. And that water's coming from someone, because there just ain't enough right now to go around. So this whole thing is part of a techno, I heard the word, what was it? A bureaucracy. The techno bros or whatever. But the point is, I don't think we're able to stop this or turn this off, and there will be some way in which we will figure out how to move through this, or it will get us. So the danger of all of this, on one hand, is just thinking that if we can get the person or the 3 people or the 20 people and somehow bring them to justice, I don't know that we can, but if we can, then we're done. And that would be the worst possible thing that could happen, because this is systemic. And the fact of the matter is, that's what Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto together, with the Saturn piece in this at the same time, that's what's coming to light here. And the trick, not a trick, the practice is, how do we stay in a realm of being hopeful, of being of focusing on the future and doing little things. If we don't survive day by day and week by week and month by month, we won't be there to help the person that needs. We won't be there for our family, our friends. So it's really important we take care of ourselves. But it's just as important as we don't pull the blankets up over our head, turn the lights off and say, I can't look at any of this. It's too painful. That's what they, again, whoever the hell they are, the unprecedented pronoun they, I think it's the National Research Institute, but there's no such thing. But that's what they want us to do. We need to stay aware. We need to do what we can. We need to, write our representatives. We need to talk to family, even when we talk to family, it's not about convincing them we're right. Whoever we are and whatever my right is versus your right. There is no right, wrong here. We're all in this together, and we have to communicate, and we have to create dialogue, and we have to create bridges. Now, that doesn't mean losing your integrity. It just means that it's not, because the beliefs here with Saturn and Neptune are often tied to deeply held, I'm going to use the word religious, but I don't mean an organized religion. They're beliefs. No amount of facts, figures, and information is going to change someone's belief. And the other thing that often happens around Saturn-Neptune conjunctions is the elevation of feeling over fact, because Neptune dissolves the logic, the right hand, left brain, young way of looking at the rational world, and it dissolves that into a more holistic and integrated left hand, right brain, yin way of looking at things. So we need to do whatever we need to do to keep going, stay alive. And what that mostly involves is communication and creating community. And creating community locally, like here, like with family, with friends, that's what's going to get us through this and around the bend. But this ain't going away. And it's not going to go away next week or next month, although we're going through a bit of an eye of a needle now. It's going to come to another layer of crescendo through the summer and fall, especially in the United States as we approach the elections this year and what's going on with all of that. I need not say more on that here. But it's going to take the five trines between Uranus and Pluto, with Neptune right in the middle through this whole time, through summer of 26 into 27 and into 28, before we're around the bend and into wherever it is that we're going next. So I'm going to end my little talk. I know I started late and then went a little over, but I'm going to end my talk with how I end all my talks. And that is, there's no reason at all, there's no purpose at all to studying astrology, to thinking cosmically, unless we do something locally. Think cosmically, act locally, and acting locally can be as little as being nice to the asshole on the phone who is treating you like an object and you're just trying to figure out how to get off AOL or whatever it is you might be trying to do. It might be as simple as the cashier who looks like they hate their job and probably does, and just having a smile and passing something along. I mean, these are little ways that are not politically engaging, so to speak, but all politics begin locally. And so think cosmically, act locally, and I'm going to end with just two other things. One is a thank you and an appreciation to the baristas and to SoulFood for hosting. And the second is, and in reference to that, instead of voting only on election day, you can vote economically. If there is some birthday present or something you need to buy, instead of going on to Amazon or the big box store down the block and around the corner, spend a little cash here, because that's what keeps places like this afloat and in business. And then the other thing I want to say is we're going to take a short break. I know we've gone way over, but we'll come back in about 10 minutes, and we'll look at a couple of charts real time, and we'll take that from there. And with that, we're formally on intermission. All right. We are back. And we're waiting. Oh, too loud, too loud, too loud, too loud, too loud, too loud. That's what it is. And Craig, I need somehow the lighting on the camera sucks again.
That's fine.
And welcome everybody back. And we have a couple of charts that we're going to do, the names out of the hat. These are going to be kind of short quickies. And is there a reason why it's so dark? It was so bright before, maybe.
Yeah. That was on me.
There we go. All right, but I'm also going to share my screen here. I'm going to set my microphone down, and I'm going to talk loud. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Nicholas! What? Nicholas! All right, first chart. And the deal is that if I pick your chart, you don't have to say everything. You can say, I don't want to answer that, but you have to be honest and you have to be present and I have to be able to see you. Where are you? Stephanie?
Right here.
Yay! Okay. So I got to put birth data in and get charts up. We're going to do a couple of charts and I'm going to do. And let's see. I think if I share my screen, how do I do that? Somewhere here.
At the low end with the camera, and then add.
And I think if I do that, I never know. Let's try. Let's just do that. And at first, it'll be things within things, crazy, but then now that will be like that. There's the chart for some God knows when time. And we're going to click on that. We're going to make that big. And we're going to enter in Stephanie's data. And all right, I can almost read this.
12/9/66.
Thank you. 12/9/66. And that's at 1425.
Yep.
And that's in Los Palace?
Dove Palace.
One word?
No, it's two.
Two palaces.
Yeah. Two poles.
All right. There you are. You know your chart? A little bit. So here we're looking at a chart. I'm looking at it with you for the first time. I see that there's Taurus rising. Are we good? Can you guys see it okay? That's a little better. I see Taurus rising, Taurus on the first house, with the north node of the moon in the first house. I will then look at Venus because Venus is the planet that's associated with the ascendant, which is the horoscope, the hour marker. And so Venus is here in Sagittarius along with the sun. Moon in Scorpio, we see a scorpionic kind of flavor to this chart because the sun and Venus are in the 8th house, which is the house of Scorpio. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio. And these planets all in Scorpio. And so we see that scorpionic kind of emphasis. We also see that Stephanie born in the mid-60s. I said earlier that Saturn, that Uranus and Pluto were conjunct, lined up in the mid-60s. Well, Stephanie was born with that Uranus and Pluto lined up just about 4 degrees apart. I always say that there were people who remember the 60s, who came of age during the 60s, like me. Then there were people who were born after the 60s and look back and go, God, I wish I lived through the 60s. And then there are people who the 60s lived through. That's Stephanie, in one way or another. And so there's that connection with evolution, but I see, I mean, the evolutionary process of Uranus and Pluto being together, and with Saturn opposite it, and Saturn and Chiron together with Venus square it. You see that red triangle? So I'm going to, the first thought here has to do with the structural dynamic around what you ideally would like to do or like to be versus, you know, that Sagittarius dream, the what you love, the big ideas, the travel, the education, whatever. And then that Saturn as being the limitations, always having to, you know, deal with the reality of what's around you. And yet with the moon so close to Neptune in Scorpio, there's something about you that has this connection with the hidden, with the mystical, with the fantasy, with the dream, yeah. Who are you? What the hell do you do?
I'm a nurse.
You're a nurse. So the Saturn, in a way, it's that Saturn opposite the Saturn in Pisces, Pisces being one of the signs of a caretaker, person with empathy, compassion, Saturn and Chiron so close together, but that Saturn and Chiron being opposite the Uranus and Pluto, and yet there's something here about the dynamic with that Venus, the square to Venus, and the either the stress. I'm looking at you into the light, so I'm doing this to kind of like having a shade on your hat, you know. How the ideals sometimes don't match up to what what you have to do in some way. What kind of nursing do you do?
Long-term care.
Long-term care. Again, the Pisces, the Pisces connection with Saturn and Chiron, you know, which is often Chiron being the teacher or the wounded healer. But there's something here about that which wounds us with Saturn being the authority, the structure, the helper, the giver in Pisces. And I would also note that over the last, you know, couple of years, last year, that Saturn in the sky was coming through Pisces, and therefore you had your second return of Saturn to where it was when you were born, which would lead me to, and I'm going to do a change here. I don't know whether this is going to show up. Yeah, it will. I'm going to really quickly here go to dynamic. And here's your chart now, again on the inside. And we can see that Saturn is just at the very, very end of Pisces. But if we back this up a month at a time, and we're just looking here at the Saturn, this is Saturn in your chart, this is Saturn in the sky right now. In fact, if we move it ahead, you can see that Saturn will overtake Neptune in Aries, but I want to move it back a month at a time to get to that Saturn right about. Now, it doesn't look like it's lined up because there's so many planets there that the computer can't put all the planets in the same place. But what we can see here is that around mid-March of last year, mid-March, end of March, that's when Saturn was returning to where it was when you were born. So that might have been the peak of some larger shift or changes that were going on. And I would actually, out of curiosity, take this back really quickly, 29 years to when Saturn was there the last time, which was roughly 1996. I'm not doing this exactly, but it would have been late 95 into 96. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between those two periods in your life.
I was divorced in 96, 97.
Yeah.
And this year, I'm trying to get out of nursing.
You're trying to
Stop doing what I'm doing as far as.
changing career.
Yes.
Yeah. And often when Saturn is in the sky where it was when you were born, it's often a structural shift in life. And we could certainly, delve deeper on this. But I'm also interested in the fact that your divorce occurred when Saturn, because in your natal chart, Venus is square to Saturn. We can go back to this view of it. So that when Saturn in the sky was back to where it was when you were born, it was also squaring your natal Venus, which would indicate some sort of difficulty, complexity. I always think of Saturn square Venus, either the Venus is the light, the love, the sweetness, and Saturn is the restraint. Now, Saturn and Venus together can mean long-term love, but it also can mean that your immediate gratification has to be set aside, for a longer-term process or something. And so it's not surprising that might have been a complicated or difficult, time for you. Coming back to the natal chart, so if you can get rid, if you could have a nursectomy performed on your life, is that the way? If you can get rid of that, so this guy walks into a doctor's office with a frog on its head, and the doctor said, "Can I help you?" And the frog said, "Yeah, cut this wart off my ass." So if you can get rid of the nursing, I'm not saying whether you're the frog or the patient. What do you want to do with the rest of your life?
I don't know. That is the point I'm at right now. I don't know what I'm doing.
Just not that.
Well,
Yeah. What's that?
Just not that.
Just not that, yeah.
well, I would suggest, based upon what's going on now, again, based upon what's going on now, I would suggest that the longer you can put off deciding what you want to do around the bend, the better your decision will be. That the pressure is to decide now. Yeah. But with Saturn conjoining Neptune, now it's going to probably take until March, April, May, even over the summer, until they get a little distance from one another. That will then give you the ability to get a sense of crystallizing, Saturnizing the dream, the mists, the illusions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And in fact, I would suggest that it may even take until later in the summer, and I'm going to show you here why real quickly, because remember I said that by July that all these planets would be at 4 degrees. I'm going to move this ahead to July. We'll just do this a month at a time, and we'll move this ahead to July, and we can see, what the hell did I do? Oh, that's 1996. How about first bringing it back up to date here, and now moving it ahead to July. And here we can see that your natal Jupiter is at 3 degrees of Leo, and that Jupiter in the sky by July will be lining up with your Jupiter return. This is the beginning of an opportunity cycle. Yeah. On top of that, Pluto at 4 degrees will be opposite your natal Jupiter, 1 degree off. Neptune will be harmonizing with it, trine, 1 degree off. And Uranus will be sextiling, which is cooperative opportunity. And so I'm thinking that by the middle of July, you should begin to have a plan and take action on something.
Very nice.
And by August or September, you should let us know what it is that you're doing with your
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I hope you're clapping for her, not for me. Okay. So next one we have is it Unique? How do you say your name?
Unique.
Unique. Well, that's unique.
Spelled U-N-E-E-K.
It's U-N-E-E-K.
Yep.
That's as unique as I've seen. And by the way, the SF at the end just reminds me that it was at SoulFood. And this is a 62787, 62787. And you will see here how every chart is so different from every other chart. 1:35 a.m., 1:35 a.m. in Everett. That's E-T-T. Wa.
Local. There.
And just looking at how different these two charts are and the patterns are in the center. But one of the things that I see here, okay, so we see here an area. Do you know your chart at all, a little bit, or?
I've looked at it. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, you know you have an Aries rising sign, so that you probably seem more direct and controlling than you really are because you're a Cancer, and you'd probably just as soon as let other people, make the decisions, or often, but personality-wise, you can be like right there. Big Jupiter rising in Aries, so it's like right there in their face.
Yes.
On the other hand, you have the Sun, Mercury retrograde. We'll say more about that in a moment. The Moon and Mars, all in Cancer. And Cancer is one of the signs that's often not well understood unless you are one. And in the spirit of full astrological disclosure, I'm an Aries. You're at Aries rising with Jupiter in Aries. And I have a Cancer moon. So I have the Aries-Cancer dynamic. Mine is very different than yours because my Aries fuels who I am, so I can do this. I do this naturally. But my Cancer moon just wants to go home and have food. It's not that simple. I got a little cramp. Okay, so our moons are actually within a degree of each other. You see, the thing about Cancer, I always think of Cancer as Harry Potter's invisibility cloak, or that original Star Wars movie where they're walking into the Death Star, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is followed by the bleepers, R2D2 and whatever. And there's that, him. And there's the guy holding that gun that you don't know what it is, but you don't want it aimed at you, And they're walking by, and Obi-Wan Kenobi turns to the stormtrooper or whatever he is, and just says, "These are not the droids you're looking for," and he doesn't see anything. Well, that's what Cancer often does: is I'm not the droid you're looking for. And it's like I can appear like this, and people can, but that's all part of a screen, so that you don't have to defend yourself, so that you don't have to worry about someone not liking how you really feel, because you should be more outgoing or whatever it is you learn to do on some basic, way. But ultimately, your job in life, I don't mean that as a job for pay, but your role is to basically absorb energy, reflect it, and create safe space for those you love.
Yes.
Said emphatically.
Yes.
Yes. Tell us how you do that.
Well, I am a court administrator, and so I run courthouses, and I deal with the public that come in traumatized, and I help them through the court system.
Got it.
So
you're like you're in the legal system, you're like everyone's mom.
Yes.
Perfect.
From politicians to people that walk in the door. So.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, though, your Venus is in Gemini, which leads me to think, though, that you couldn't exist without Gemini energy, back and forth, communication, telephones, writing, talking, interaction.
Brain communication. I can pay attention to like 6 things at once, like 6 different types of conversations.
Yeah.
In a room, so I'm like the go-to of like read the room, tell me what's going on, and how to strategize and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I see in your chart is that Neptune, we're back to the dissolving dreams, illusions planet, is in opposition to your sun. And so there's something about the dynamic of relationships that has been, is, or will be confusing in your life. Whether it's that other people mislead you or try to mislead you, or that in some way there's something here that suggests that there's some energy involving the dream, the possibility that's not limited by what is real, and yet that what is real piece is also, in some way, you seem to be the person with Jupiter rising, harmonized to Uranus, the lightning, revolutionary. It's almost like you can, you can do good things, Jupiter. You can give people hope and make things bigger, better, more, Jupiter, in a way that somehow cuts through all the everything that some other people might have to step through and not get to where they're going.
Cheerleader, like the personal cheerleader. If somebody can give me complete worries, like we had a trial today, and everybody was falling apart, and I was able to turn it into like a game of like, okay, hot potato, who has a hot potato now? Like instead of focusing on the problem, it's focusing on the skill or the.
I think the one, not downfall, but the issue, one of the issues that you may have to work with is letting your desire to show the positive and the good get in the way of your real feelings to the point of wanting to resent someone enough to hurt them. I don't mean that you would, but there's that sense of the I don't get mad, I get even. It's not even that. It's like a passive.
Super passive aggressive.
Passive aggressive energy. Yeah.
I'll say it.
I'm being honest.
But in some way.
I can't spell either. Like,
You can't what?
I can't spell either. Which is a joke my name is.
EITHER. Now you can spell either. Okay. But in some way, that passive aggressiveness is your superpower.
I will remind exes of what you just said.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's enough for now. Just trying to think if anything else comes to mind here. As far as timing, also. I think this summer is going to be a big time for everyone.
Can I ask a question?
Shoot. Doesn't mean I'm going to answer.
I know. Neptune was super intense for me. Like, I literally felt like I was melting the entire time it was getting out of Pisces. Like, I looked at it a million different times trying to figure out why, because it's not, I don't know, my Neptune is not by the Neptune where it was recently.
No, it's not, but you do have Neptune at the top of your chart. So Neptune is it's an important planet. And as Neptune has been moving through this part of your chart here, moving out of Pisces and into Aries, I mean, in some ways, this is coming into a part of your life where I think the longer trajectory of your life is lightening your load, whatever that means. Getting rid of the heavy, whether it's emotional baggage or what's that?
That's true. I'm looking at getting out of the course.
Yeah.
Lifestyles. So.
And I think that as Saturn, because Saturn and Neptune are moving together here, that I think that when Saturn comes up over your ascendant, and I'll give you a quick date here as to when this might occur, is that here we can see, again, your chart's in the center. Saturn moves faster than Neptune. So if I move this ahead a month at a time, you'll see that Saturn overtake Neptune, and it'll then turn retrograde. There it's retrograde, and here it's coming toward your ascendant, and right there around June of 2027, really a little before that, this will start. So, we're looking at next spring, summer, Saturn coming over your ascendant I think then it'll retrograde back over that point, and then it will be not until late winter of 2028, early 2028. That'll be the time in your life when you make the shift that you're probably thinking about making now. It doesn't mean you can't do it sooner, and it doesn't mean it'll automatically happen then. It just means that from an astrological perspective, that would be a time when this all could unfold. And I would, out of curiosity, just because we can do this, I'm wondering what happened when Saturn was last over your ascendant. You were born in 87, and Saturn went over your ascendant when you were about 10, 11 years old, which would suggest that there was some sort of dynamic change on the home or family, or I don't know if anything comes to mind there.
Grew up in
98, 99, that period of time.
grew up in foster care, went to 14 different schools in 12 years. I was exiting foster care at that time, going into.
So you get to exit. You were exiting foster care at that time. Now you get to exit foster caring others.
That's
Do you understand what I just said?
Yeah, yeah,
Click.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
You mentioned about Mercury retrograde in the
Oh.
chart.
Well, all of them.
Well, yeah, Mercury is already in Cancer. It's already internalized, and that Mercury retrograde is even stronger. It's louder. It's almost like Mercury in Cancer on steroids. As part of that passive aggressivity, it's easier to hold in and not say something, not because Unique is not clear of what she's feeling, but because sometimes there's so much going on. It's like, where do you jump in? And by the time you figure out a way to say it, it happened 2 weeks ago. It's too late. Why bother?
Or by the time you figure out what the feeling is, like there's like 6 different feelings and sensory and everything. By the time you spit it out, it's too late.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we don't laugh every time. Okay. Cat. All right. All right. We're gonna do this also quickly. CAT. Cat. Solar fire. And that's not a CAT. That's a cat. And we have an 11-1960, 11-1960. And we have a 12:25, is that morning or night? 12:25 p.m. post meridian, post afternoon, Castro Valley. San Francisco.
Well,
Near San Francisco.
it's near the bay. Yeah.
And that's CA. And do you know your chart?
I have looked at it, but I'm trying to follow it, but I don't really get it all that much.
Okay, so first thing that I see is that even though you're a Scorpio with a couple of planets in Scorpio, with Mercury and this out of the way, with Mercury and Neptune conjoined in Scorpio, there's a mystical, magical, poetic side of that scorpionic energy, but your moon's in Sagittarius, so you're what I call a blonde Scorpio. It has nothing to do with hair. You're a blonde Scorpio, not a black-haired Scorpio. And again, nothing to do with appearance. It's that Sagittarius moon tends to want to lift you out of the Scorpio energy that is perhaps the most powerful energy of the zodiac, and it gains its power by holding its energy in and transmuting it so that the lead turns to gold, but it's done internalized. Whereas the Sagittarius has no lead because it looks at lead and assumes it's gold anyhow or already. And so there's this kind of optimism of that. It's almost like you feel this and intuitively you're in these darker places, but you respond from the gut in a way that is more like Unique Jupiter rising. But you have an Aquarius rising, which means that, that everyone thinks you're a weirdo.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
Yeah, and yet it's hard for you to be weird because your sun is square Uranus. So there's a part of you that it's almost like early on in life, you figured out that it was easier to bite the bullet and do what you should do rather than be as weird or as eclectic as you felt or wanted to be. And again, that's also doubled down by the fact that Mars and Saturn are in a tug of war with, Mars in Cancer saying, yes, feel whatever you want. And Capricorn saying, yes, but do this. And so there's this dynamic of yes, no, hot, cold, outside, inside that I think is pretty strong. And Chiron's in the mix too, because the Uranus Chiron opposition, which is not something very unique, that was in and out of phase for most of the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, I think. But the fact that the sun is at 90 degrees to that is like really, really important, because there's something here about the work that you have to do to overcome those feelings of wound or hurt, so that rather than impacting you, you can transmute it and maybe help others or do something in that form. So, and then we have the Jupiter, Venus, Saturn in Capricorn. That Jupiter, Venus so close together is kind of like, in ancient astrology, it's like a cosmic blessing. It means, yeah, you'll get through life with enough of what you need. But Saturn's right there next to it saying, yeah, but it's not going to be as good as you thought it was. So who are you and how does this work? And give us a little bit of feedback.
I am always, through my things that have happened to me, I always seem to turn them around to help others. I'm always doing that.
Yeah.
And I've always been in the service, more retail. I've been in the retail sector. I love to work with people. I love to talk.
Yeah.
Just like,
Well, it's interesting because with, the moon in Sagittarius is basically the blue sky position. It's not like you would mislead it. Well, you might. But no, because Mercury conjunct Neptune can sell an illusion. It can sell the ideal, the perfection.
Yeah.
And with the moon in Sagittarius, and it's right up at the top of your chart, it's like you honestly can feel like this. And then you have that Aquarius rising, which may not do as well in the close, intimate, squishy, gushy, emotional stuff. I remember Jeff used to say that I point to Jeff as if he's still here, huh, Jeff? Jeff used to say that Aquarians, like humanity, is just the humans they hate. And he used to say that the true Aquarian wants a relationship without fluids. And he didn't necessarily mean body fluids, although he was a Scorpio. He meant water, because water in astrology is emotion. And of course, you're a Scorpio with Mercury and Neptune, and Scorpio is a water sign, but it's fixed water. And fixed water can be, it isn't always, but it can be ice, because that's fixed water. Fixed water can also be standing at the bottom of Snoqualmie Falls, or the intensity of a high volume pressure of a fire hose, not a garden hose. And that edge or whitewater, kayaking, that's fixed water also. Fixed water can be fluid. It doesn't have to be ice. But it's interesting that Scorpio energy is 90 degrees to Uranus. There's a price to pay for being weird. And yet with the Aquarius rising, Saturn and Uranus kind of are both important. So that's what I have to say. And I would imagine that going into stroke, that's what everyone calls COVID. The 2020, 2021, whether you call that the COVID or the lockdown period or ever. To me, planet Earth had a stroke.
Yeah.
I mean, everything, you know, and during that period, it's almost like because of the lineup in Capricorn, it was almost like you were processing that before it occurred. There was something about the timing of that. By the time the rest of the world was in that lockdown, stroke, not moving phase, on some level, you were already into something next. And I don't know exactly what that means or how to phrase that. Does that make any sense to you at all? Maybe not. No.
You mean that I foresee?
No, just that the energy of the heavy, the serious, that it's almost like you processed it quickly compared to other people
I did.
because the planets were already moving past your Capricorn planets by then. So that's my thought.
Thank you.
She was washing the groceries.
Excuse me?
She was washing the groceries before everybody else was.
Well, no, I had all these people at home, you know, I wanted to make sure that we all got through it.
Yeah.
So, again.
Well, good. And with that, thank you, and thank you, diehards, for hanging out. And that's it. We need to get out of here and and I'm going to, before we sign off here, let me unshare my screen. How can I do that? I think I can do that. And I'm going to thank those of you online who put up with the craziness of both the fiasco at the beginning and then the slow internet here that kept buffering us. And so thank you for sticking with it. And this will be up and online for anyone who wants to watch it or go back through any of it later on. And with that, I'm going to say adios, amigos, and think cosmically and act locally.
Thank
That's it. We're off.
There. Yeah.
you. Yep.
Maybe we'll see you.